Imagine thinking that you've met the love of your life and you dream of building an amazing life and wonderful family together, only to learn that this person would turn out to be your worst nightmare and would change the lives of your family forever. This is the story of the murders of Lovetta Armstead and Jazzmen Montgomery. The content presented on the Crime Lounge podcast are based on public information researched and compiled using multiple sources, including the internet, as well as personal thoughts and opinions of the host and the guests. This show is not meant to disrespect any of the victims or other individuals that are discussed. Due to the graphic nature of true crime and the subjects that will be shared, listener discretion is advised. Hello, good people, and welcome to the Crime Lounge podcast. I'm your host, Nita J, and this is the first official episode of the show, so yay! I'm super excited to dive right into everything, and let me just say this before we get started. This episode, this case, is a doozy, okay? I just want you to be prepared for it. You may or may have not heard about this case. It is just an absolutely wild ride, okay? And when I thought about what type of case I wanted to cover for the first episode, I just thought back to one of the cases that has always stuck with me. Like, I've heard of this case years ago, but I've never forgot about it because it's just such a sad, heartbreaking case. It makes me angry. It sends me like on a wild ride of emotions, but it just never left me. And so I wanted to just go ahead and kick off the podcast with this case. So before we get started, I do want to give you all a couple of trigger warnings. This episode will have elements of domestic violence, child abuse, suicide, murder, as well as child murder, okay? So if these concepts are a little bit too much for you, I completely understand if you want to step away from this story. Just take care of yourself and join me for future episodes, okay? My sources for this episode include a post on the website of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, an article from the Dallas Morning News, and an investigation discovery show called Evil Lives Here, Shadows of Death, Season 2, Episode 6, entitled The Monster. And I'm going to leave all of my sources below in the show notes. That way you can go ahead and check those out. All right, let's go ahead and get started. September 21st, 2009 was a seemingly normal day in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas, Texas. Latasha Bradfield, a resident of the neighborhood, was relaxing at home when she was startled by a series of loud knocks at her front door. She rushed to the door to see who it was, only to find the two sons of her neighbor, Lovetta Armstead, frantically seeking help. Latasha was confused as to what was going on, but the youngest of the two boys was crying and talking on the phone, and she wondered why. He was holding his stomach, and she noticed that he was bleeding through his shirt. Just then, the older son yells out, "He killed our mom! He killed our mom!" Latasha took the phone from the little boy and realized that he was on the phone with a 911 operator. Since the boys were too distraught to tell her or the operator what was going on, Latasha took over the call.
Levita! I don't want to touch nothing.
Don't touch nothing, okay?
I don't want to touch
Inside of 3844 now?
Yes, ma'am. I'm leaving back out. She's not breathing. I'm just so
She's not
trouble.
breathing?
No, ma'am.
Who's not breathing, the mother or the 6-year-old?
The mother. I can't even find the 6-year-old. I'm scared to be in here just in case she come back because I don't know what's going to happen. Oh, my God. These poor kids.
Lovetta Armstead was a teacher from Dallas, Texas. According to those who knew her well, Levita was a vibrant, positive woman with a bright smile and a big personality. As I was researching this case, I came across several home videos of Levita where she was smiling and dancing, and she just seemed like such a pleasant woman. Her friends and family loved spending time with her and said that she was always willing to help others. Levita was also known to be a wonderful mother and loved and adored her 3 children, her 2 sons, JT and Jarrett, and a daughter, Jazzmen. At the time of this case, JT was 12, Jarrett was 9, and Jazzmen was 6 years old. Levita raised her children as a single mother until she met a man named Gary Green. Gary Green was a tall, kind of stocky guy, standing at about 6'3" and about 300 pounds. He was a resident of Dallas, Texas, and he was born on March 14th, 1971. Now, as I was preparing for this episode, I noticed there wasn't a lot of information out there about Gary's backstory, so we're going to go ahead and discuss a few things about him later on in the episode. Levita and Gary fell for each other pretty quickly, and she was excited to have him meet her children. Gary moved in with Levita and the kids and lived there for a little over a year before the two decided to get married. The children seemed to like Gary, and they looked up to him as a father figure. After living in the home for a while, Levita and the kids started to notice a change with Gary. He started to become increasingly aggressive over time. The atmosphere in the home was starting to shift, and Gary's controlling nature started to present itself. According to one of the documentaries on this case, JT talked about how Gary would always try to exert his dominance in the house, especially over the boys, even when it wasn't an issue of discipline. He would yell, berate, and beat them with whatever he could get his hands on, just so that they would respect him and know who's boss, so to speak. For some reason, he didn't treat little Jazzmen this way, and I'm guessing it's because she was the youngest of the 3. To neighbors, friends, and family, Gary no longer seemed to be a good fit for the family, mainly because of how he treated the children. Little did many of them know Gary was also becoming verbally abusive and physically violent towards Levita. Although she was becoming more and more fearful of Gary, as any good mother would, Levita would try her best to shield her children from Gary's increasingly abusive behavior. Sadly, this behavior only worsened. This episode is brought to you by Airfordable. So, have you ever wanted to go on a trip and you had to book a flight, but the flights were a little bit expensive and you just need a little bit more time to be able to pay for that flight? Well, that's where Airfordable comes in. So, this company is amazing, you guys. I've been using this company for a couple of years now. It's a Black-owned company that allows you to pay for your flights in installments. So they'll let you go on the website, submit your information for the flight that you want, pay a small down payment, and then pay for your flight in installments before you leave. I'll be completely honest with you. This has saved me so many headaches and allowed me to be excited about my trip and not have to be worried about paying for my flight or a big price up front. I could just pay for installments. It's a lot less stressful, and I really love working with this company. The customer service is absolutely amazing. I know you guys will love it too. So I'm going to leave a link below this podcast episode for you guys to check it out, and I'm going to be giving you $25 off of your first booking. So yeah, click that link below this podcast episode, learn all about Airfordable, and book your next flight and pay for it in installments. After answering the door and seeing a frantic JT and Jarrett, their neighbor, Latasha, decided to walk over to Levita's home while on the phone with the 911 operator still on the phone. I'm almost certain she wasn't prepared for what she was about to see.
Walk away and talk to me so I can know what's going on.
I will. Go to my school.
Walk away from them, please.
Okay, I'm walking outside.
What happened?
Okay, go back in, baby. Go back in. They're saying I'm walking over to the house now.
Okay.
I'm walking to the house now. They are saying there's a 12-year-old young man, there's an 8-year-old young man. They are saying that the husband has stabbed the mom and the daughter, and he has driven away to kill himself.
He stabbed the mother. How old is the daughter?
The daughter is 6.
female is not breathing?
No, ma'am. She's not responding.
She can't, and you can't find
It's blood everywhere. It's blood everywhere. Oh.
And you can't find a 6-year-old?
I didn't go back in. I didn't go back in. I didn't go back in.
Do you know the husband's name?
His name is Gary Green. Oh, can someone please come? This lady is laying on the ground.
Yes, ma'am.
The kids are in my house. The 2 boys are in my house.
You talking to the officers now?
No, they haven't came. I heard them coming, but they haven't came up here yet.
The girl is in the bathroom?
That's what they say. The mom is like right in the midst of the. She's in the walkway of the bathroom, and I didn't.
Covered with blood, you said?
That area, yes, it's all covered in blood. It's all covered in blood.
After viewing the horrific aftermath of whatever had taken place in her neighbor's home, Latasha ran back to her home and hugged JT and Jared tightly, not knowing what she could say or do to comfort them at that moment. Jared was still holding his stomach, and she noticed that he was bleeding through his shirt. She kept them close as they waited for the police to arrive. Detective Robert Quirk responded to the crime scene along with the police. He walks into the home and describes it as a well-furnished, neat, and organized middle-class home. He says that everything looks to be in order until he walked further down the hall toward the master bedroom. He walked into something out of a nightmare. The master bedroom and bathroom was extremely bloody, with pools of blood, smears, and spatter all over the floors and walls. Levita's lifeless body was laying on the floor, bloodied from what appeared to be from multiple stab wounds, and her face was purple and bruised. As he continued to inspect the scene, he walked over to the bathroom where he found little Jazzmen, who was bound with tape, laying on the floor by the bathtub. Although there were no visible signs of trauma or injuries on Jazzmen, they knew she was already deceased. Jared and JT were going about their normal day, attending Bible study at their church, not expecting anything was happening at their home. Gary had come to pick them up, but the boys noticed that something was different about Gary's demeanor. For starters, Gary never picked them up, and for some reason he was talking with them and asking them questions about their day, which he also never did. Something wasn't right. As they arrive at home, Gary gets out of the car and appears to make a phone call before entering the house. The boys waited in the car for a bit before walking inside. Both of the boys began their normal routines with baths and changing clothes. They still hadn't noticed anything was amiss. Little did they know, there was a horrific scene just a couple of rooms over. Just as JT began to walk down the hallway to his room, he heard a loud scream. It was his little brother, Jared. "Help me! He's trying to kill me! He's trying to kill me!" Just then, Gary emerged from the master bedroom. JT explained the look in his eyes. They were dark and fierce. It was the look of pure evil. JT then notices that Gary has a large knife in his hand, and as he is grabbing onto his brother's shirt collar, he's walking towards JT. He throws Jared down on the floor near his brother in one of the bathrooms in the home. Gary asked them, quote, "Now give me a reason why I shouldn't kill y'all," end quote. Completely terrified, neither JT nor Jared knew how to answer this question. Mind you, at the time, JT and Jared were 12 and 9 years old, respectively. So imagine the terror that they're feeling in this moment. Jared did at least try to answer Gary's question, but as soon as he began to speak, Gary flew into a rage. He told him to shut up, and he stabbed young Jared in the stomach. JT saw his little brother's shirt. It was starting to become bloody, and he can see the pain in his little brother's eyes. Just then, the protective big brother mentality came out, and JT jumped up and pushed Gary with all of his strength. Jared began pleading with Gary not to kill them, saying anything he could to try to calm Gary down and let them go. And for a moment, it seems like it's working. Gary calms down, but he now has something unimaginable and horrific in mind. He grabs the boys and escorts them to the master bedroom, where Gary had come out with the knife just a little while earlier when the boys got home. As the boys enter the room, they are faced with the sight of their mother's bloodied, lifeless body laying on the floor. JT ran to his mother's side and cried out for her, begging and pleading for her to wake up. According to the Dallas News, he told the boys, quote, "I killed your mom because I loved her to death," end quote. Gary then made a motion to the boys for them to look across the room towards the bathroom. JT and Jared looked over and saw their little sister, 6-year-old Jazzmen, laying on the floor with her hands bound with tape behind her back, and her feet were bound as well. At this point, Gary seems to have given up on all the horror that he had put this family through on this fateful day. He gives the boys a cell phone and tells them that he's leaving and that they are to call the police after he leaves. This is the point where the boys make the call and run over to their neighbor's home for help. As the police searched the crime scene, trying to piece together what had happened in that house and why, they find a few blood-spattered, handwritten letters on the bed. There were 2 letters that Levita had written to Gary, and the gist of these letters were that she wanted out of this relationship. She was tired of the abuse and thought that they should just go their separate ways. Another letter that was found on the bed was a letter that Gary had written as a response to Levita's letters. Here's an excerpt from Gary's letter according to one of the documentaries that I watched as a research on this case. Quote, "You asked to see the monster, so here he is. The monster you made me. There will be 5 lives taken today, me being the 5th. Pray that the Lord allows my soul to enter heaven. If not, I will burn in hell forever." End quote. With this letter, investigators concluded that Gary had planned to kill Levita, Jazzmen, Jared, JT, and himself that day. For some reason, Gary didn't complete his plan, but was now on the run. The police began to search for Gary, knowing that he was a danger to anyone he may come in contact with. He remained at large for a full day after the murders. Thankfully, his family came forward to help turn him in after he sought refuge with them when he left Levita's house. On September 22nd, 2009, Gary walked into the police station to surrender himself, and the search for him was over. Gary gets into the interrogation room and tells Detective Quirk exactly what happened, and I'll make sure I post a clip of the interrogation in the show notes. Gary had moved out of the home by this point, and Levita was hoping to annul their marriage, which hadn't lasted that long. However, on the day of the incident, he convinced Levita to let him stay at the home that day. And according to some of the reports I read, basically what he did is he lied and told Levita that his parole officer needed to visit him and that that address was still on file with the parole officer, so that he just had to be at the home on that day. So he pretty much lied to convince her to get in that house, and sadly Levita made the mistake and let him in. While he was there, he started discussing their separation, and as they went back and forth for a while, he became violently angry. He first lashed out at little Jazzmen, which that made me so angry, but anyway, we'll get back to it. He first lashed out at little Jazzmen, who was there at the home with her mom. He bound her with tape, taping her arms behind her back by her wrists. And then he carried her in the room for her mother to see, so he was almost taunting Levita. Gary laid Jazzmen on the bed, and as she helplessly watched on, Gary began his attack on Levita. He brutally stabbed Levita over 30 times in front of her precious baby girl. An autopsy later confirmed that there were also signs of asphyxia and some bruising on the side of her neck. In one of the documentaries, Gary actually speaks about the attack, which is very infuriating to hear him speak, by the way, but I mean, I'll link that below as well so you can watch it if you like. This was a prolonged attack. Like, it wasn't just a short, frenzied attack. It went on for like an hour. He said it was like an hour of fighting and yelling and stabbing. That was torture. After he murdered Levita, he went to the bathroom and turned on the water in the bathtub. He then walked back into the room and picked little Jazzmen up. This is so sad. He took her back to the bathroom and he immersed her in the water, holding her head underwater until her little body stopped moving. He then picked her up and laid her lifeless body on the floor near the tub. Jazzmen's autopsy later revealed that she had been drowned, but then there was also some hemorrhaging at the top of her skull. All of this happened while JT and Jared were at Bible study. So after he was done with the attack on Lovetta and Jazzmen, he took a shower in the same bathroom where Jazzmen bodies was laying. And then he got dressed and he left to pick up the boys so that he can move on to the next phase in his plan. Gary Green was tried for the murder of Lovetta Armstead and her daughter, Jazzmen, on October 26, 2010. At trial, it came out that Gary had been violent with a girlfriend in the past and came very close to ending her life as well. He had also harmed many other women before he had met Levita. According to my source material, one woman who dated him in high school told jurors that Gary Green stabbed and choked her, and the other said that he choked and hit her while she was pregnant. Gary's brother testified that he believed that Gary had suffered from mental health issues since they were kids, but nothing was ever done about it. A psychologist testified that Green suffered from mental illness that causes him to experience paranoid delusions. According to the Dallas News, a psychologist told the jurors that Green suffers from schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type, and he wrongly believes that people are trying to hurt him. But he also clarified that this was not saying that the illness made Green murder his wife and stepdaughter. After hearing the facts of the case, the jury deliberated and they found Gary Green guilty of capital murder. During the sentencing phase of the trial, JT and Garrett were given the opportunity, JT and Jared were given the opportunity to address Gary in the courtroom. Their victim impact statements were extremely moving, but this is the line from Jared, the young boy that he stabbed, stood out for me. Quote, "Hey Gary, I love you. I thought you weren't going to betray me like this. To me, you were my father, and I love you. But I'm not going to let you take over my life." End quote. If you find the impact statements you can find them on YouTube, and I'll probably try to post them in the show notes. You will cry. I was bawling my eyes out. It's so sad. And to hear him even say the words, "I love you," after all that pain that this man had caused, for him to stand in that courtroom and say that, and that by that point, he was like, 10, 11 years old? To say that, it's just, it was heartbreaking. Gary Green was sentenced to death. He remains on death row at the Allen B. Polunsky unit in Livingston, Texas. All right, y'all. So that is the case of Lovetta Armstead, Jazzmen Montgomery, and Gary Green. I told you guys it was a doozy. At the end of each episode, what I'm going to do is something called Unscripted Thoughts, where I kind of just give my opinions and personal thoughts on the case that was covered. So I'm just going to briefly just touch on a couple of things. One thing I will say, I'm going to include 2 of the documentaries that I watched for this case. One of them was from Investigation Discovery, and the main people who are speaking in the documentary is JT, who's an adult now, and the neighbor, Latasha. So they're speaking in that documentary. And it's a really good story. It's really good. They did a really good job on it. But the other documentary is on YouTube, actually. It's a little bit longer, but it features not only JT and neighbor Latasha, it also features Jared, the little brother, who's, a little bit older now. And then it also features Levita's mom And then it also features Jazzmen's dad. So remember, Gary Green wasn't Jazzmen's father. He was her stepfather. So in this documentary, we got to hear from Jazzmen's biological father and his new wife. And it was just really interesting to hear the dynamic between all the families. And they all seemed to really, really get along to, properly raise little Jazzmen. So it was really good to hear that. But one thing that stood out to me, and if you watch the documentary, you'll hear it. The wife and Jazzmen's father, I don't remember their names off the top of my head, I'm sorry. One of the things they were saying is that over time, when it came time to drop Jazzmen off back at home with Levita, Jazzmen used to tense up and get really nervous and start shaking, and she never wanted to go back home. And I thought that was just so sad and heartbreaking because, they were just thinking, oh, how kids are. They want to stay somewhere. They don't want to go home. They don't want to leave their friend's house. They don't want to leave their favorite family member's home or something like that. But they did notice that over time that she just really, really, really just got nervous when it was time to go home. And I thought that was just so sad because we really got to listen to our babies. Okay. My mama always told me that kids know they can read people very, very well. The only thing is they're just not very good at articulating what the problem is, but they can always point out a problem. If the energy's not right, a kid will point that out. So I just thought that was really interesting. But yeah, this case just really, really broke my heart, especially when it comes to, elements of domestic violence, which is something I'm really, really passionate about spreading awareness for. This case made me think of a couple of things. Now, do you know how when people talk about, a battered woman and a woman that's in an abusive relationship, and the first thing they always say, well, why doesn't she just leave? Why doesn't she just get out? This is what happens sometimes when women try to leave. This is a prime example. This case was a prime example. And this is just a quick statistic that I saw when I was reading online. The most dangerous time of a woman in a domestic violence situation is when she wants to leave and the 6 months after she leaves. That is the most dangerous time for her. So that factors into why women just don't leave like you think they should. It's not easy to just get up and leave. And sometimes they have children to think about. They're putting their children's safety in jeopardy if they decide to leave. They have to think about all of these things. So I want you guys to keep that in mind. If you ever hear someone say, well, they're in a domestic violence situation, they could just get out. It's not that simple. And Levita tried that. She tried that. She wanted better for her life, and she wanted better for her children. And she thought Gary just wasn't right for them. And she tried to leave. And unfortunately, Gary couldn't handle that. And we saw from the trial, Gary has always been a violent person towards the women in his life. So it was just one of those situations where he was super, super controlling. He wanted his way. And when he was losing that control, he went crazy. And that's what happens in these situations. So I just wanted you guys to be mindful of that. I know I hear that sometimes. And not just women, men go through that too. And it's very hard to get out of those type of situations. So just wanted y'all to be mindful of that. So that's all I got. That's all I got for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed the very, very first episode of the Crime Lounge podcast. I'm so excited that you decided to listen to me. I will be back very, very soon with the next episode. Make sure you check out the description of this episode. It's going to be all sorts of links and things that you can use to connect with me and to learn more about the podcast. The website is up, www.crimeloungepodcast.com. I designed it myself, so go over there and check it out and let me know what you think. And also definitely join our Facebook group. I just started a Facebook group where we can get together and discuss true crime and discuss the cases that we talk about on the show and things of that nature. It's brand spanking new, so ain't nobody in there just yet. So definitely just hop in there, tell your friends, but just be patient as we grow the group, okay? So that's all I have with you all. I will talk to you all very soon. Take care of yourself. The Crime Lounge podcast is brought to you by Magenta Productions with music by Infraction. Visit us at crimeloungepodcast.com for show notes, to join our Facebook discussion group, or to suggest a case. Don't forget to subscribe, connect with the show on social media, and leave a review.